On today's Technobabble, 9 video mistakes I don't want you to make.
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Hi everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Technobabble. I am your host, Paul Allen Clifford, and I'd love for you to join the conversation. So if you could head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact, you can interact with me there, leave your questions, comments, snide remarks, I say. Anything like that. You can also find all the contact information there, so you can drop me a line, paul@trinitydigitalmedia.com, or you can leave me a voicemail on the voicemail hotline number 1-877-POD-ECHO or 1-877-763-3246, and you can absolutely just leave a message there, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And I'd just love for you to interact with me in whatever way you want. Right now I've got some questions pending for tomorrow's question and answer show, including one on ProPresenter and one on video codecs. So those are just two examples of people that have interacted with me that I think will be helpful to everybody when we talk about them. So head on over there. You can also reach me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Paul Allen Cliff, PaulAllenclif. So, by the way, if it helps you, that's the shortest version of all those names. So, Paul, that makes sense. There's only one way to spell that. Allen, there's a longer version of Allen. That's not how you spell mine. It's the shorter version. And Cliff, you might be thinking there's two F's. No, actually, because it's on Twitter, I want it to be short. So CLIF. Make sense? I hope that helps you. So before we continue, I do want to talk about two things real quick. If you watch the show a lot, you'll know that my pastor is about to release a book called What Life Are You Waiting For? It's available for pre-order, and it's from Tyndale House, the same people that publish the New Living Translation, which is actually the one that we use at my church. And I am really excited about this book. I'm on the team that's doing some publicity and outreach for it, and that's why it's on the show. It's not that I'm being paid for this or anything like that. I just believe in it, quite frankly, because I've seen what happens when you take God at His word and you act like you have only one life, because you do, and you spend that life doing what He made you to do. And that's really the message of this book. So if you're at all interested, head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/whatlifebook, or if that redirect doesn't work, try trinitydigitalmedia.com/whatlife, and that should take you to the Amazon page where you can pre-order this book. It ships the beginning of May, so we're not far away from it right now. And a good reason to order it now is because Amazon's price was a little lower than it is right now, and it's creeping back up. So by launch time, it will be high, probably what the cover price is, and so you can save yourself a couple of bucks. You're not actually paying for it right now. You'll pay for it when that launches. So that's actually something I need to go do and pick up a few copies for gifts and such. Also, all the streaming provided for the Church TechCast network is provided by churchstreaming.tv. Churchstreaming.tv is really responsive when it comes to customer service. Everything I've asked them about, they've had a quick answer to, and sometimes the answer was, that's a great idea, let's see if we can't do that. And you just don't get that in most companies. So I would encourage you to give them a try. And I have an address where you can get a 1-month free trial of the full service. Did I mention it's free? Yes, it's a free trial. So head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/church streaming, and that'll take you directly to the page where you can get your free trial. You can get iOS or Android streaming in addition to computer streaming and even a Roku channel, which if you want people to watch your show live on their televisions or watch reruns on their televisions, it's a great way to do it. It's inexpensive to add it to most TVs, and it's just something that I would highly, highly recommend. So head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/church streaming and give that a try. So I have made a lot of mistakes. In fact, this whole week has been about my mistakes. So if you haven't seen all the episodes of that I've put up this week, then by all means head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com and just watch through some of the last ones. But today is more specifically video mistakes. Now, some of these video mistakes are on technique, some of these are mindset, some of these are just based on how you interact with your team, but they're all related to my experience as a church videographer over the last decade plus, almost decade and a half now. So, the number one mistake that I made was I was proud of how good I was. Now that's something that when you're first starting out, if you've got a propensity for something, you can start to think, "Oh, look how great I am." And you can get a big head because you don't yet know all that you don't know. So since you don't know everything that you don't know, you think that you know it all. Not true. So that was mistake number one, and I came across as pompous and arrogant because of that. So I apologize to the people that I was interacting with because that's not what I intend. And to this day, if I come across pompous and arrogant, that's not my heart. I do have opinions about some things. I'm not going to lie and say that, yeah, 3D cube spin is just as good as a cut. No, it's not. It just isn't. There's reasons to use it, but it shouldn't be used the same. So we'll talk about that a little later. But I want you to know that I'm open for discussion on any of these issues. So let's discuss them by all means. Number two, going back to my example, I didn't understand transitions initially. The first video I ever did, I did on an editor that had a random transition button. And so I used the random transition button for all of my transitions. So one of them was like a drop down from the ceiling and bounce a couple of times kind of transition. One was like a 3D cube spin. One was like a push. And I just thought that a transition was how you got from one thing to the other, and the more interesting, the better. Not true at all. As it turns out, 99.9% of transitions in video are cuts. The other 0.1% are cross dissolves, and occasionally you will see some other transition, including the guy walks through the middle of the frame transition, which a lot of people don't even know is a transition, and it is. So I want you to understand transitions and what they mean. When we first started doing IMAG, image magnification, putting live video from cameras up on the screens, I was much too literal with what I mean when I say magnification. So I didn't have any artistic eye to it, So I was always doing the biggest shot I could get away with on screen. Always. And that is not necessarily the best way to do it. So if you look back at my stuff from, say, 2002 to 2007, you'll see we've got recordings of this, and it was always boring and always large. There wasn't a lot of artistic feel to it. So that's something that I took it too literally. Now, this is one of these controversial areas. A lot of people believe that when you say IMAG, it always has to magnify. I disagree. I think that it always should add to the viewer's experience, and that might mean showing them something smaller but giving them a bigger perspective. So this is controversial, but I think that that was a mistake that I made early on, and that's why I'm passionate about it now, because I've seen the difference and I've made the transition, pardon the pun, I've made the transition in my mind from just always making it bigger to always adding to the experience. Primarily making it bigger, but not always. So that's something else that I made a mistake in doing. 4, not allowing enough render time. Now, we're very lucky today that machines are getting faster and faster and able to process things much more quickly. When I first started, every single transition had to be rendered multiple times. You never knew how it was going to go. So while that's less the case now, there are still some things that you'll be done with your part of it, and the machine will need to crunch on it for a while to get it to the final product. So you should always remember to allow a lot more time than you think it's going to take to do that. So if you think it's going to take 20 minutes, if you can allow an hour, I would. The Thursday show that I put out, I think the actual time that I spend on the cutting and the editing of that is probably about 20 minutes to an hour. But it takes about 4 hours to do, because I've got to transcode, I've got to do some rendering, I've got to do some exporting, and then I've got to do more transcoding before I upload it. So it's actually a bigger process. Now, hopefully someday I'll get a Mac Pro, and despite what my 7-year-old daughter thinks, they're not actually trash cans. Hopefully someday I'll get a Mac Pro that can handle all this stuff lickety-split. But in the meantime, it takes a lot of time. So I didn't always allow enough render time, and so sometimes I'd go to bed Saturday before service and the video wasn't done. I really should have started on it earlier so that it could have been done on Saturday, so that if anything needed to be fixed, I could fix it. So there's at least once or twice where a video was not as good as it could have been had I allowed enough render time. But I didn't. So that's a mistake that I made. It took me probably until I started shooting on a DSLR to really understand f-stop and shutter speed. And I really regret that. When you work with broadcast cameras, you really don't have to understand them as well as you do when you work with the DSLR, because I was actually working with a broadcast camera last night at church, and I was noticing just how fast the lens is. It goes down to 1.6. From 1.6 all the way up to 18. FStop. That's the range, and that is a phenomenal range. Let me grab my 50mm lens right here. This is actually a classic lens made by Vivitar, and it is a 1.9 lens, which is an odd f-stop. I admit it. I don't know that you can see that. Let's see if this webcam can focus on it. I don't know that it can. Anyway, but it actually says f1.9, so it's more like f1.8-ish. But that is the fastest lens that I own for my my DSLR. But my normal lens is like a 2.8. So I now understand the difference of those, and I understand what you get depending on the aperture. You know, that you get a shallower depth of field the more wide open the aperture is, which is a lower number. I also understand how playing with shutter speed affects things, how that a slower shutter speed is much more jumpy, which can be an artistic effect. And a longer shutter speed is can be more blurry, which is also an artistic effect. But you need to know which is which. I didn't understand it as well as I do now before I started shooting with my DSLR. So I regret that I didn't take the time to learn that earlier. Number 6, one thing that I was very bad at is, as I was explaining what I wanted to do to my pastor and to other leaders at my church, I would try and explain instead of show. And video is a medium that is better demonstrated than it is explained. So what I want you to do is, as things come up, show, don't explain. Take every opportunity to show. A good example of this is when we needed to use a switcher for the first time at our church, which was probably 2003. I made sure we got a switcher. And I made sure I used it for everything I wanted to use it for. Well, not everything. I wanted to do some IMAG, and we weren't quite ready for IMAG. But everything else I tried to use that switcher for, so that I could say to the pastor, do you remember when we did thus and so? That's why we need a switcher. Do you remember when I was able to smoothly transition between the computer and the camera? That's why we need a switcher. Do you remember when I put the text over the video? That's why we need a switcher. Which is easier to explain than we need a switcher. We need a switcher. It's easier to draw on someone's memory of what they have seen than to try and explain to them what they will see. Do you understand? Okay. Next, thinking that being a generalist will make you a specialist eventually. This is one of my key weaknesses. I am not a specialist in any of the varied areas of video. I'm getting much better at some areas than others, but we have other people on the team at my church that are better at each individual area than I am, with the possible exception of ProPresenter. Well, Josh and I both know a lot about ProPresenter, so maybe that's a tie. But I know something about every area. I know how to direct, I know how to TD, I know how to do shading, I know how to run ProPresenter, I know how to run a camera, I know how to run a roving camera. I know something about lighting. I know something about all of those. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in any of them with the possible exception of ProPresenter. So that's a limitation in my knowledge. Is I thought if I became an expert in everything, I would become as good an expert in each specific thing. And that's not the truth, because you need to spend a lot of time on each specific thing to become an expert in it. So I'm probably medium, moderate on a lot of things. Shading, I'm probably still a novice. Directing, I'm moderate. ProPresenter, I'm probably an expert, but that's the exception that proves the rule, I suppose. So, being a generalist does not make you an expert, except perhaps as an expert of knowing something about all the aspects of video. So, that's probably the next thing that I would have changed. Number 8, not practicing enough. When you know something about everything, you start thinking that you know everything about everything. And so you quit practicing. You just think, I can come in cold and do it. Now that's a mistake. More practice makes you better because you learn the exceptions. So I think I would have said before I started doing the Tuesday and Wednesday shows, which are against a high key background, I think I would have said that I could do a high key background. But as I started doing a high key background, I found that I really wasn't as good at it as I thought I was. There were subtleties of it. I'm still not 100% sure that I've got the foreground lighting quite right. It's better, but I'm not convinced I've got it perfect. So, there's still room to grow. Am I better than most people? Perhaps. Now, most people, I'm including a lot of people that haven't done it a lot. But that means practice yields results. What I've also started doing is I've started using Photoshop daily to create graphics for the site. And as a result, I've picked up a few more tricks. I've used Photoshop on and off since 1995, by the way. So I've used Photoshop longer than I've used Final Cut Pro, which I consider myself pretty proficient in. Longer than I've used video cameras, longer than I've done a lot of things. But I didn't practice with it. I would use it for a couple of weeks, then not touch it for a couple of years. Now that I'm using it every weekday and some days on the weekend, I'm getting better and better at it. So practice really helps you. You really pick up those little things that differentiate yourself from others. And number 9, one of the things that I regret the most is how poorly I followed my leaders at my church. Now, this isn't specifically video related, but still, I think that it's something that a lot of people do. When you're an expert in an area, you can think, well, I know more than they do, so they should listen to me. And while there is some truth to that, you don't want your pastor coming up and say, man, why don't you do more of those 3D cube spins? They're just so snazzy. There is a problem with that, but there's also a problem with walking in and saying, yeah, sorry, Pastor, I'm not doing any of the stuff you've asked. You're clearly a video idiot, and I am an expert. At the beginning, I erred too much on that side, and I regret it. It was a mistake. That was something wrong. Now, I didn't actually say that out loud, but I kind of thought things like that. I thought, yeah, I know that you've worked with video in the past, but you're not as good as I am. So just just be quiet and let me do what I can do. And that was a mistake. Really, it was. So that's something else that I really regret. I regret not following well. So tell me, what do you regret? What are some places where you wish that you'd done it better? Um, Add that into the comments and we'll go from here. Thanks very much for your time and your attention, and let's use this knowledge to go out and change eternity. Until next time, I'm Paul Allen Clifford with TrinityDigitalMedia.com.